the executive director and founder of Friends of Intelligent Democracy, the first hybrid PAC run by college students. Tonight, I'm joined by Nick Rubando, who's running in Ohio's 5th District. So the way that tonight's program is going to run is Nick's going to introduce himself a little bit and talk about his campaign, and then we're going to move on to some questions that my communications team has written, and then we'll take a short break in which all of our audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions. Our political and campaign staff right now is tracking all our social media comments, and we'll be able to put in your questions. So first off, I'd like to introduce Nick. Nick grew up in Holland, Ohio, a small working class town outside of Toledo, Ohio. Nick went to study at Indiana University, where he received a degree in journalism. And during his sophomore year of college, he began volunteering with the Obama campaign in Indiana to get his mother health insurance. After college, Nick moved to California and continued to volunteer for progressive Democratic campaigns and helped flip a congressional district in Southern California from red to blue in 2018. When he moved back to Ohio, he began working at a local metro parks as a cultural programmer and conservation advocate. And he realized many of the issues he had fought for in California and Indiana also existed at home in Ohio. Today, he is running to ensure healthcare is a human right, the environment has meaningful protections, and corporate PACs don't influence elections or legislation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Nick to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate what you're doing with Friends of Intelligent Democracy. I think it's so important to get students involved, especially at this level. Like you said in your introduction, the reason I got involved in politics was because I got involved at a college campus as a student. And, as you were kind of alluding to, in 2008 at the Obama campaign, my mom was a single woman with a pre-existing condition. This was before the Affordable Care Act was passed. And it was extremely difficult for her to afford an individualized insurance plan. And, a lot of times you don't know what to do as a student, as a young individual. But I saw an opportunity to get involved in the Obama campaign in 2008. And, we were knocking doors, we were registering student voters. And when he won and when he flipped the state of Indiana and eventually passed the Affordable Care Act, I really saw how small individual actions can really create huge, impactful change for millions of Americans. And so that's why I think it's extremely important what your organization is doing and how you're getting students involved, because this is the future. This is really the next wave and the next generation of American leaders. So I am so excited to be endorsed by this organization, to be involved with this organization, and just so happy to be here to lend a voice for individuals who want to be heard in Washington and push for progressive ideals.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for the compliments. And so now we're going to move on to the questions. So as everyone is aware, COVID-19 has been both an economic and a public health crisis, and has, unfortunately, as many things in America, suffered from the politicization of common sense practices, including wearing a mask, which we all know is the best way to protect others from yourself when you're out in public. So our first question is two parts. One, do you think wearing a mask has become a political statement? And second, what are the dangers of politicizing public health?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a political statement. I think that all doctors are pretty universally in agreement here that wearing a mask not only helps you, but helps the people around you. Our Republican governor here in Ohio said that, wearing a mask is simply caring for your fellow human beings. And, I think it's extremely important that we look to the health experts to really guide us here and not try to be persuaded by political personalities. Donald Trump even wore a mask this past weekend because I think deep down he really understands that it is important and that this is the way that we're going to help individuals. Here in Ohio, like you were saying, we've seen double-digit unemployment rates, and we're trying to slowly open back up. But I think that the only way that we're going to be able to open up our economy efficiently is by wearing masks, so that everyone who goes to work or goes and visits a grocery store can do it safely, not only for themselves, but for the people who are working at these organizations. So, we've actually been trying to spearhead a campaign of ensuring that cities here in Northwest Ohio mandate masks. The way that Ohio is set up, it's kind of a color-coded system. So if your county reaches a level 3, then masks are mandated. That has happened here in Wood County. So, we are mandated to wear masks, but, up in Lucas County, where Toledo is one of the largest cities in this district. The city of Toledo has mandated wearing masks, but other cities in that county have not. And we think it's important that if we want to ensure we can really stop the spread of COVID here and open back up safely, that people need to wear masks.
No, I 100% agree. And I think what's unfortunate is that, some of this resistance to mask wearing really comes from a position of selfishness. There are people who have a totally legitimate medical reason not to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. But I think the people that, they number one expect people who work in grocery stores and restaurants and hair salons and things like that to put themselves at risk, but don't understand that the risk actually comes from them when they go in the grocery store, when they go and get their hair done. And so I think that it also kind of goes to people needing to rethink priorities and also realizing that, someone in your family may not be afflicted by the virus, but you don't want to be the reason that someone's sister, mother, brother gets coronavirus, which I think is extremely unfortunate. Our next question is on a topic very near and dear to my heart as a member of the LGBTQ community. And that's on your campaign's website, you emphasize how important it is to stand shoulder to shoulder with the LGBTQIA+ community. And so what does effective allyship look like to you?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Charlie, because I think it's important. One of the biggest things for me and for our campaign is listening. Going to that community and being a part of that community and just listening. Because, I think it's important to realize that, just because I'm running for Congress, I don't have all the answers to everything, but you can get answers by going into communities and talking to individuals and really understanding the problems that are affecting these groups. And, with Pride Month in June, we worked really closely with Equality Toledo, as well as down in Findlay, this group called LGBTQ Spectrum, which has been doing some great work in Findlay, which is a historically red area of this district, but they have really done some phenomenal things. They painted an amazing mural in downtown Findlay. But, we have reached out to these groups. We've talked to these groups. We've asked them, what is the best way and what are the best policies we can advocate for. Of course, we want to ensure that the Equality Act gets passed in Congress. I think that is most important. The Supreme Court upheld an amazing decision to ensure that people can't get fired for being part of this community, and that's great. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And to be an effective ally, I really think that you need to listen and you need to stand up. Once you hear about what needs to be done, and once you hear about the problems that are affecting each community, then you need to take action. You need to stand up, and you actually need to do something, and you need to put your name on the line. And that's what we're doing. That's what our campaign has been doing. And we're trying to ensure that we're totally inclusive. And that means reaching out to these communities, getting them to be a part of our campaign, getting them to be a part of our decision-making process. And we're really honored to ensure that that's happening.
That's great. And I think especially in this, the social media generation that mine has become, is that people kind of conflate, putting in 30 seconds to then doing something meaningful, in the idea that just because, you retweet something or you post something on your Instagram story that you can wipe your hands of it and you're done for the day. And I think, what needs to be, and understand it's difficult right now during, social distancing in the coronavirus pandemic. Once things return to what will be the new normal, is that, we need to see people stepping up, especially people who have the privilege of not being part of an oppressed group, that can advocate for others. And I think help people and help, bigoted individuals understand that by coming from the same community. I think that's especially where, in terms of LGBTQIA+ equality, where straight allies can be extremely helpful, is helping explain equality to other people and what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
So, kind of on the same, vein of activism, I wanted to know what are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement and the conversation about racial justice and equity that's happening in our country right now?
Yeah. The Black Lives Matter movement is extremely important. This is a conversation that is long overdue, but I'm glad that as a country, we're having it right now. I mean, I know it's been going on for such a long time, but it's great to really see this movement just growing and continue to grow and really make some impactful changes. It's been phenomenal here in Northwest Ohio to see all the different Black Lives Matter movement protests popping up. They've been extremely peaceful. And, like you're saying, Charlie, it's great to see people who aren't necessarily Black stepping up and putting their voice to this movement. And, again, what we've been really trying to do as a campaign is just listen, is listen to the stories, listen to the experiences. And honestly, it's been heartbreaking to hear what a lot of individuals go through on a day-to-day basis. But, hearing these stories, we then are trying to lend our voice to the movement. We're trying to lift up Black activists in our community. I believe it's actually this Saturday, we have an individual who had started a Black Lives Matter movement in Defiance, which is, again, a more rural part of our district. But she's a student from that area. We're having her do an Instagram takeover on our account because we just think it's important to highlight these Black voices that are really standing up and doing the work in our community. And it has been really, really inspiring to see that kind of change and that kind of excitement and that kind of enthusiasm for this movement, especially in a more rural area of Ohio.
No, and I think that's what I've also noted too. For the audience that doesn't know, actually, Nick and I live in relatively the same area. And, again, we have urban centers that have a high population of Black and Brown Americans. But it's interesting once you get out into the suburbs, how there is still that activism, especially from young people. I mean, not even talking about college age students, but high school age students that have really organized movements that are still being conscientious of social distancing efforts. And I think that also has been capitalized. And, we've seen multiple reports where the Black Lives Matter movement protests did not affect coronavirus numbers. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's this personal irresponsibility that is. And so I think that's also, successful activism, but also mindful activism in the sense that the COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately at rates of, 2 to 4 to 6 times, affecting Black and Brown people as well. So moving on to our next question. So Gen Z, people like me and my staff and younger millennials have been leading the fight for climate justice and against a climate crisis that they were born into. How do you plan on supporting their message and actions, both, on the campaign and then if elected into Congress?
Yeah. First, I have to say kudos to the younger generation. And, I feel like I might land on the older side of the millennials, but, I give the Gen Z and younger millennials so much credit because I don't think that the conversation around, really environmental justice would be this strong if it wasn't for the activism of this community going out into the streets, going to Washington, really making their voices heard. I think if 2020 and even before has taught us anything, it's that, when you stand up and when you create a movement and when you go out and protest, people listen. And that has really been seen from the activists, especially on the climate side. And so I really appreciate that because this is a huge, issue for our campaign and something that we really want to focus on here in Washington. Charlie, I'm sure you're well aware, but maybe not everyone. We have Lake Erie in this district. And unfortunately, every summer it turns green because of toxic algal blooms that occur that are caused by, factory farms and runoff into the Maumee River, which then feeds into Lake Erie. And, this is just a small local piece of why we want to create environmental justice and environmental change, because this is our drinking water. And, this is the future of our community, but we really need to be a global leader. And, that's why our campaign has really, we've sided with the Green New Deal. I truly believe that this would be an amazing piece of legislation, not only for our planet, but also economically for us. Here in Northwest Ohio, we have an amazing opportunity to invest in wind energy. We're only utilizing less than 1% of our potential wind energy right now as a state. We have an opportunity to really mass produce solar panels in Perrysburg, Ohio, which is right outside of Toledo. We have one of our largest solar panel manufacturing plants in all of North America. And we could do that all over this district, all over this state, all over this country to ensure that we're getting carbon neutral by, I would love to see it by 2030, to really ensure that we can make some really positive changes for our generation and for the future of this country. We need to be a leader on environmental justice.
Exactly. And I think, we were talking about the economic component, and I think that's a key way to engage Republicans on the issue because, you can take politics out of it and just get down to the math. Yeah. And, people, Republicans always talk about, saving people saving people on their taxpayer dollars and things like that. If instead of paying your energy bill, there was a tax credit, which we support to get solar panels in residential and commercial areas, all things that we can do not only to be better global citizens, but, spend our money better. I think especially is something that can be used to communicate with Republicans on the issue. And what's been unfortunate in the hearing earlier last week, Republicans were criticizing the idea of environmental justice and implementing environmental justice programs on universities. And I think it comes from this tone deafness and also this just plain insensitivity on the right where, kind of this idea like it's a problem that doesn't affect me, so therefore it doesn't affect anyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's especially frustrating as young people coming from older generations that, some by conscious and some by an unconscious fault of their own have created the climate crisis that we are in today. It was, we know that ExxonMobil, for example, knew about climate change and knew about the effects of carbon dioxide for decades and didn't say anything. And then it's all of a sudden, young people like you and I, it's like our burden to bear on how we deal with that. And which to me is just mind-boggling in itself. So on to the next question, because I don't want to stay on anything too long. With the ongoing conversation about reforming the prison industrial complex as a form of correcting systemic racism, what are your plans for fighting for prison reform at the state and federal level?
Yeah. We definitely we need to end the for-profit prison system and really the practice of mass incarceration. And I think, instead of commuting the sentences of people like Roger Stone who are lying to Congress, like we should really be commuting the sentences of nonviolent drug offenders and, releasing these individuals back into the community. I would also advocate for decriminalizing substances such as marijuana so that we can really get our prison system back in order. It's crazy that, we have around 25% of the world's incarcerated population here in America, when I believe that we have 5% of the world's total population. It's incalculable, and we need to change that.
And I think especially too, because criminal justice reform is an issue I take a lot of focus on simply because it's just, again, another one of those issues where we're just seeing a lack of common sense, where, we're imprisoning people for long periods of time for crimes that, if we think about, from a restorative justice perspective, there was no true harm to the community, right? And then I think that also goes back to a greater narrative on policing, where, later this month, we're going to be rolling out our kind of version of defund the police. And part of that is ending quotas for police officers. The idea that, cities around this country and counties around this country force police officers to create negative interactions with the people they're swearing to protect makes absolutely zero sense. And I think if we really have an honest conversation about that with most people, I think they would agree with that. And I think that also goes into the idea about de-escalation training. As we've seen with the protests around this country, we've seen the militarization of police, and we've had our police behave in ways that if another country was treating their citizens like that, the United States should make a foreign policy crisis out of it. And so, I think that we need to hold ourselves to the same values that we especially hold international partners to as well. Moving on is actually a question that our political director, Alex, wants to ask you. Cool. So I'm going to let him into the call real quick, and you guys can have a quick conversation.
Great.
Hey, Mr. Rubando. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my question is, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought upon a great deal of stress, uncertainty, and disarray to the lives of countless Americans, especially the lives of young people. Moving forward, how should we go about providing accessible and affordable mental health care to today's youth?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question because unfortunately, mental health care has been so often overlooked when we're talking about healthcare in general. I personally and my campaign, we're proponents of Medicare for all, and within the Medicare for all platform, there is a stipulation where it does provide mental health care benefits, and I think that is extremely important because I think the main thing about Medicare for all system is it really looks at preventative care, as opposed to, having a problem and then trying to fix the problem. It really looks to caring for the individual before that problem even manifests itself. And I think that really investing in mental health is a huge proponent of that because a lot of times, if your mind isn't healthy, it can manifest in other ways in your body. And that's why it's so important to ensure that, people are utilizing that aspect. With that being said, I think that we can invest more heavily in, some telehealth situations where, especially now, people can receive counseling, online. So that, even if you're not in a situation where you can go and visit a doctor or a healthcare professional, you can still receive some guidance and have a conversation via the internet. But I think that also leads into a whole problem of some people just don't even have reliable internet connections. And I know we're getting kind of off on a tangent here, so I apologize. Yeah. But I think just to get back to your original question, we need to pass a Medicare for all system. It's more apparent now than ever with this pandemic why we need it, why we shouldn't have healthcare tied to our employer when we're seeing double-digit unemployment rates and skyrocketing unemployment rates. And with that Medicare for all system, it would really start to address the mental health problem and crisis that we're seeing in this country and help alleviate that. So I appreciate you asking that question, Alex.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the things you said is it's really important to have proactive care, and especially with mental health issues. If we could just jump on those problems early and get people the treatment they need, then we could save the taxpayers a lot of money, and we could help people out before the situation gets worse.
100%. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think that has been one of the biggest problems in our healthcare system is that we have failed to invest in this preventative care. And, I think that is the problem of having an insurance-based model is that they're actually profiting on people being sick as opposed to saving money when people are being healthy. And that's what we need to transition in, and is really trying to keep people healthy as opposed to keeping people sick and profiting off that. And it's disgusting that that's kind of like our current healthcare system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to another question. How can we support college students, especially particularly international, low-income, and first-generation students, during a time when they are at the most vulnerable due to poor decisions made about higher education?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And I don't know if you saw the ruling that came out today, or actually, I guess, a reversal, but international students will be able to stay in the country now. Which is fantastic. I believe it was Harvard and MIT actually sued the president because they had, I'm sure you're well aware, they had put a stipulation in place where if a college was going solely online, that international students could not stay in the country if they weren't taking in-person classes. But the administration, because of pressure from students, from universities, has rescinded that. So that's a huge positive. That's really good for students, for universities, for international students that are coming here. But to talk about kind of like first generation students and low income students that are coming into colleges, I've talked to a lot of people who work in universities and work in admissions, and what they said was that a lot of these individuals, the problem is that they face a lot of barriers before they even get into the university system. A lot of these first generation or low income individuals don't really know about some of the opportunities that are available for them, whether that is because their school doesn't have like a college counseling program, or they have an unstable home life, or maybe they have a great home life, but they just don't have stable internet. Like I was saying, a lot of the times, if you're applying for loans or getting information about, scholarships, that is all done online. So if you don't have adequate access to the internet, you're not going to be able to apply for any of those things. So, what I was talking to people who work at universities, who work in admissions, what they were saying is that they think, and I totally agree with this, I think universities should allocate some money for students who come in, and then they can actually get scholarships once they're actually at the school. So once they get to the university and they can, learn a little bit more about some of the options that are available to them, they can get scholarships throughout the year and be eligible for those. So not all the scholarships go out pre the school year, so that people who, maybe are first generation students or low income students have that opportunity to kind of stabilize at the university, have some of the options that are available to them, and then get some of these, Pell Grants, get some of these scholarships from the university, so that they're able to continue their schooling and really be a part of the university program.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you bring up how some students are almost like left behind and are coming in at a further disadvantage when they already enter college. And one of the things Friends of Intelligent Democracy really believes is that we need a greater investment in our public education system. And I think the pandemic has really increased and really exposed the inequities in our public education system, especially with different school districts having to move online. In some of the lower income school neighborhoods, people just aren't able to learn as effectively, whether it's because, as you mentioned, the lack of internet access, or because the teachers and the school districts don't have the resources to reach them as well as some of the wealthier ones.
Yeah, 100%. And that is still something that schools are dealing with as they start to open back up, and we've been focusing in on that as well. And yeah, it's a tough process, and we need to overhaul public education, public funding of education. Honestly, I think from pre-kindergarten all the way to higher education, and that's something that our campaign is certainly focused on.
Yeah, and so the next question I want to ask is, kind of a consistent part of the Republican agenda is attacking women's rights and the right to choose when it comes to reproductive health care. And so if elected, what steps would you take as a member of Congress to protect reproductive freedoms for people whose reproductive rights are being stripped right now in a lot of different states, as recently as yesterday in Tennessee?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's extremely important to protect everyone's reproductive health care rights. And, I truly believe that, abortion is healthcare, and that has always been the stance of our campaign. I actually volunteer at a Capital Care clinic here in Toledo, and, it's actually one of the only, abortion clinics in all of Ohio, unfortunately. And, these are chemically induced abortions. And actually, the individual I'm running against, Bob Latta, has put legislation in place to actually make chemically induced abortions illegal. So that would effectively knock out the only abortion clinic here in our district, here in Northwest Ohio, as well as really this whole region that serves people as far away as West Virginia. So, I would ensure that legislation like that could never be passed and would never really see the light of day. I also think that we have to end some of these heartbeat bills. We've seen these pop up in Ohio, and fortunately, our state Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, and I think we've seen that popping up in other states as well. But I think that we need to put out a federal mandate to end any kind of legislation like that, and really reaffirm, the situation in Roe v. Wade, and reaffirm that judgment, so that, that is the mandate, that is the law, and that people are not able to overturn that.
No, I 100% agree. And I think it's just kind of surprising that, especially from the Republican Party that talks about, individual rights and, the liberties and freedoms enshrined in the Constitution. We've had the Supreme Court over and over talk about how the right to abortion health care is a fundamental constitutional right. And then the party that loves to talk about the Constitution and loves to talk about law and order is the first group to throw that out. Mm-hmm. It's extremely unfortunate. So the next question, which is part of the reason we're here, is why is it so important that we flip Ohio's 5th congressional district?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that question. So, I mean, I've talked a lot about what I believe in and what we want to do to create some change. But the person who is currently sitting in this seat, his name is Bob Latta. He's kind of the antithesis of everything that we've talked about and really discussed. And one of the big things that our campaign wants to do is get big money out of politics. And the reason for that is because of people like Bob Latta. He sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee, so he's tasked with regulating the oil and gas industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and yet that's the exact companies that he's taking a majority of his corporate donations from. So, he's supposed to be regulating the pharmaceutical industry and opioid manufacturers, and yet he's taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from opioid companies each year to get reelected when our state is top 2 in opioid-related deaths. And we're talking about, protecting our environment and investing in alternative energy and how great of an economic driver that would be not only for Northwest Ohio, but for the entire country. And our representative is taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from fossil fuel companies each year and voting against incentives for alternative energy. And, this is hurting Northwest Ohio. This is hurting the entire country. And so that's why it's so important to get people like Bob Latta out of office, because, he's not only not bringing up good legislation and helping people, but he's actively hurting individuals. And the other great thing about Ohio is that, it's a battleground state. And I think we've seen more and more polling coming out that Trump is now underwater in Ohio. A lot of people early on in the cycle wrote Ohio off as a Republican stronghold now, but that's just not the case. Polls after polls show that if the election was today, Biden would win, and we want to keep up that momentum. And so the reason that we're excited to flip this district is, the more people we can get to register for me to vote and get excited are also going to vote for Joe Biden. We can flip this district and flip this state of Ohio, which would effectively get Donald Trump out of office. And so we're really excited for that. And, I think no matter who's at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side, if you believe in progressive values and you believe in making a change in Washington, the only way that that's going to happen is investing in down ballot progressive candidates like what we're doing here in Northwest Ohio, because we want to go to Washington. We want to go to make a change. And we know that we can flip this district and flip this country blue.
Exactly. And we 100% agree with that. And, our organization's kind of messaging in a similar vein is that, especially in our age group, there are a lot of people who have been disillusioned by the presidential primary process and aren't as confident in Joe Biden as other age groups are. And I think what also needs to be put in part of the messaging, whether it's from the Biden campaign and down ballot Democrats, is, this, even just at, I'm 19, and this is right already one of the most consequential elections in my lifetime and probably for the rest of my life, in that, we have a chance and an opportunity. And as you said, the polling is showing that our movement is working to unseat a president that, we've even seen groups of Republicans come out against, right? You have the Lincoln Project. You have over 100 staffers from the George W. Bush administration who, Donald Trump has essentially transcended both political parties and created his own little cult of just like a hatred, like objective hatred towards groups of people that just like don't fit in their ad targeting model, right? And that aren't the people that show up with the $100,000 checks and things like that. So my team right now is compiling our audience questions. So I'm going to talk a little bit right now while they do that about Friends of Intelligent Democracy and what we do as they get that together before we move on to the next portion of our program. So first, as I said before, thank you to everyone who's watching the live stream right now and ends up watching the archived version of this. And right now, as you can see at the bottom, there's a link These events will always be free. That's part of our goal to increase access to the campaign finance space for young people. But to keep events going like this and support candidates like Nick, if you can go and donate, I understand right now is a very hard and economically challenging time, but if you can go and donate anything you can afford, there's the link down there at the bottom. And, Friends of Intelligent Democracy were, compared to a lot of other groups, we're a relatively new organization. We were started in August of 2017 after I was actually almost kicked out of an Ohio Democratic Party fundraiser because the staff there didn't believe that young people were involved in that part of politics, essentially the campaign finance space. And at the time, they were right. I was not there to write a $5,000 check to multiple people. And most young people aren't in that position either. And so that's, one of the core values of our organization is increasing access to the campaign finance space for young people by being able to aggregate contributions from people of any age and any demographic to put them behind the candidates that we all mutually support. We're endorsing about 70 candidates this cycle. And we try to thread the needle between progressive candidates and a little bit more moderate candidates to try and create as large of a net as possible. We think that, a great feature of the Democratic Party is that we have a diversity of ideas. And, we all want to accomplish the same things, and some people just have a little bit of a different way of getting there. And, we've already seen this start to work. We ran a special election ad in New York's 27th district for Nate McMurray, who's a great progressive running in that district. And actually, Chris Collins' former district before he was convicted of white-collar crime. And we were able to reach 150,000 in-district voters in 1 week with just $1,000, which shows the power that putting together grassroots donations really has in our community when it comes to social media ads, for example, which is what we specialize in. So moving on. So our group has put together some questions. I'm going to bring Alex back for 2 of them.
Hi. So first question I have for you is, how have you adapted to virtual campaigning, and what are some of the greatest challenges of running against an incumbent?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think all of us who are running for office are doing it in a landscape that we have all never seen before. So that has been both challenging, but also exciting because, as terrible as COVID-19 is, I think it has allowed everyone to somewhat wake up a little bit and take notice to our surroundings and really understand the importance of electing leadership that cares, electing leadership that is competent, and realizing their kind of responsibility in that role. So, we have seen a lot of people stepping up. And, before COVID-19, we were doing a very robust door knocking campaign. We had a ton of volunteers. We were going out knocking on doors. Obviously, that had to change. We transitioned very quickly into phone banking and then doing kind of digital democracies, we called them. So it was basically, we would go live on our Facebook page and hold town halls and just, pick a topic or a couple topics and have people just write in comments to us. And that has continued to go extremely well. We've also just kind of, like you and Charlie were saying, boosted our digital media presence, really trying to engage people where they're at right now. A lot of people are at home and they're online and they're communicating in places like Facebook or Instagram or, and other aspects like that. So we're trying to meet people where they are and create content that has been engaging for individuals on that front. But another huge thing that we've been doing is providing resources. On our website, we have resources to show how to file for unemployment. Before school let out, we had, resources for parents who wanted to help teach their children at home and best practices for doing that. And, we also just had ways for small businesses to file PPP loans because we think it's extremely important to ensure that our community is staying safe, but also staying well taken care of, because unfortunately, our representative is not doing that kind of work right now. And that was what we were consistently hearing, is just that people were so, they were scared because they didn't have any answers and they didn't know what to do and they didn't know who to turn to. So we really try to, pick up that banner and be there for the individuals in our community and be there for the constituents in our community, because we care. We want to see this area do well and succeed. So that's kind of what we've transitioned into at this time.
Well, that's great. It's great to hear that there's somebody in your district who actually cares about their constituents, as opposed to just wanting to let the Republicans walk all over working people.
Yeah.
And so another audience question that I have here is asking about the next COVID-19 relief bill. So after the CARES Act was passed almost unanimously, the latest bill, the HEROES Act, was passed by the House but is currently stalling in the Republican-controlled Senate. And so I just would love to know, what would you like to see out of the next congressional relief bill?
Yeah. And I thank you for that question, Alex, because, as many of you probably know, or you may not, but so there's some extra benefits that go along, some extra unemployment benefits that go along right now that the federal government is providing. So, anyone who has filed for unemployment is getting an extra $600 a week from the federal government. That is going away at the end of July. And that is going to be a huge economic downfall for a lot of Americans who are really depending on that. So there is definitely some urgency to get a new round of stimulus passed. I actually really like the HEROES Act. Bob Latta voted against the HEROES Act. He didn't really offer any explanation as to why he did that. But, I think that if we're talking about any stimulus opportunity, I definitely think that there should be some individual stimulus checks that are included in that. I definitely want to see money for robust testing systems. I think that we still are not hitting the numbers of testing that we've seen. I know for a fact here in Northwest Ohio, we don't have enough tests. I've talked to people on my staff, myself included, who have wanted to get tests here in Northwest Ohio and have not been able to do that. So I think we need a lot more money for testing and contact tracing, which is extremely important to ensure that we can get back and open up our economy safely. But another part of the HEROES Act is actually $1 trillion that is provided to state and local governments. And the reason this is important is because with so many people not working, states and local governments are not able to accept income taxes. And that is money that pays for things like teachers and hospitals and libraries. And this is extremely important. We were talking about public schools and how public schools are underfunded already. Well, if these states are not taking in property and income taxes because people aren't working, then that money is not going to be able to go to these public schools. So they're not going to be adequately funded to ensure that teachers are safe, staff are safe, and that our children are safe when they go back to school. So I think it's extremely, extremely important that any stimulus package we pass in Washington has that money that goes directly to states and local governments.
Absolutely. I think everyone talks about needing to reopen, but we can't do that without the necessary money that Congress can appropriate to make sure that testing is safe so that we can actually get back to our lives safely.
Yeah, 100%. Testing is a huge aspect of that. And it's really sad that, we've heard from the president that he wants to slow down testing, as well as, there was a state representative here in Ohio that was just talking about, trying to slow down testing and discouraging people from getting tested. And it's so backwards. It's so harmful for our community. It's really sad. It's sad that it's come to this point.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Alex. Next to ask an audience question is Helena, who is our deputy political director that works with Alex and is coming to us from Washington, D.C.
Hello. So the question for the audience to ask you is, the fight against gun violence has really transformed into a strong youth-led movement with groups such as March for Our Lives, just to name one. So we kind of wanted your thoughts on what we can do to strengthen the fight against gun violence.
Yeah. And Helena, again, that's an amazing question. We've been endorsed by an organization called Ohio Students for Gun Legislation, for Safe Gun Legislation, which is an extremely great organization here in Ohio. We're a gun safety candidate checked by Moms Demand Action. And we think it's extremely, extremely important. But the first thing we need to do is really break the dependency of lawmakers that are just getting tons and tons of money from the NRA. Because, here in Ohio, there's been multiple polls that show, I believe it's 80% of individuals here in Ohio want to see universal background checks. And yet we have no laws that are enforcing that, no laws on the state side, no laws on the federal side that are enforcing that. And the overwhelming majority of Americans want to see this happen. And the problem is like, all right, so where's the disconnect? If the majority of Americans want to see laws that are in place, what's happening that is making it so that this is not effective? And the problem is that the money from super PACs, the money from organizations like the NRA is clouding our lawmakers. And Bob Latta is a perfect example of this, another person who takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from the NRA and then, votes against any gun safety legislation in Congress. So I think, again, the activism is extremely important of how we can ensure and protect, kids in schools and how we can get laws passed. But I also think that we really need to work on ensuring that we're changing kind of the financial settings in Washington and really looking at how elections are financed and how super PACs are able to work. I'm a huge proponent of passing a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United so we can get super PACs out of there, because I really think that big money in Washington is causing things like gun safety legislation to really get gummed up, and so that we're not able to pass things that are, the vast majority of Americans want to see.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Helena. For our next question comes from Sarah, who's our outreach coordinator and is coming to us from Colonia, New Jersey.
Cool.
Hi, Sarah. Oh, Sarah, I think you're on mute. Oh. Okay, all right. We'll come back to Sarah. I'll ask another question. So as we all heard a couple weeks ago about the intelligence talking about how the Russian government was paying Taliban agents to kill American soldiers, and which I think shocked the country in both parties. And so number one, I want your reaction to that. But then also, what do you think that for the next Congress, what the foreign policy goals need to be, or what needs to change in American foreign policy?
Sure. That's a great question. And you're right. I mean, the news that both situations are terrible. So either Donald Trump knew that Russians were, putting bounties on American soldiers' heads and did nothing about it, or he just failed to read that in a briefing and didn't care enough to do his job to learn that was happening. I honestly don't know which one's worse. But either way, it shows just the lack, the incompetence that is in that administration, and just the lack of care for Americans, especially American soldiers, service individuals who are over there fighting for our country. I had many constituents reach out to me and they say, like my son, my daughter is over there fighting, and Bob Latta, of course, did not make any statement on this, had nothing to say in regards to this. I think the vast majority of Republicans had nothing to say about this. But I mean, this is basic stuff. This is, ensuring that Americans are protected when they're fighting for our rights overseas. And that is so extremely important. Now, with that being said, I do think that we sort of need to divest a bit in military industrial complex that we've really created in this country. And I would want to see us, pull out of a lot of places that we're in right now. I think it's important that we are investing more in a diplomatic role in a lot of these countries as opposed to a military role in a lot of these countries. I know it's not exactly a foreign policy, but I think we should agree to the Paris Climate Agreement. I think we need to reestablish our standing with other countries in this in this world. We've really, because of what has happened in the Trump administration, we've really tarnished our reputation on the world scale. And so we, first and foremost, we need to ensure that we can gain the trust of the world again. And I think that involves in restarting treaties, especially the Paris Climate Agreement, because I think that, while that doesn't solve all the problems, that's a step in the right direction, and it establishes our credibility back on the world stage.
No, I 100% agree. And I think too that, again, like I said before, that, the United States wants to see American values portrayed in other countries, but then doesn't espouse American values themselves. I think, which exacerbates, I think, some of the problems that we face. So I think we're going to try and bring Sarah back and see if she can ask another question.
Great.
Hi. Is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay. So the next question is, how do you plan to fight for disabled and immunocompromised people in the era of COVID-19?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that question. Again, I think that this kind of goes back to ensuring that healthcare is a human right and passing a single payer healthcare system. I think it's just so important that we don't allow insurance companies and companies themselves to discriminate against individuals on the basis of healthcare. I mean, I think as far as just in the short term, I think we really, really need to step up our testing, because people who are immunocompromised, if they're expected to go back to work, or if they're, have a child who is going to school, who then could come back into the house, we are implementing so many ways that could be extremely dangerous for these individuals. And that is why we need to have a robust testing system in this country where people can get tested on a regular basis so that we know what is happening. I don't know if I've actually mentioned this, but I'm sure everyone kind of knows about it. But like, you can have COVID-19, you can have coronavirus and not show any symptoms and still be carrying it around, still spreading it to other individuals. And I think that that's where the vast majority of the spread is coming from. So to ensure that people who are, vulnerable to this disease and immunocompromised, to ensure that they feel safe re-entering the workforce, re-entering the community, I think it's extremely important that we have robust testing and mandate testing for a lot of our companies as we're reopening.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. So we're actually coming to the near the end of our time, and so I have one last question, because I think that people forget that candidates are people too. And COVID-19, this pandemic, has been a very stressful time. People stuck at home, not at work, and things like that. So what are the things that you've been able to do to kind of help get through quarantine?
Yeah. Well, Charlie, thanks for asking that question. It has been interesting. It has been very interesting to kind of like be a candidate during this time. A stressful situation on top of another stressful situation. But my family has really been there for me at this time. And it's kind of cool because, I have a very large family. They're all over the country, but we've been doing almost weekly Zoom calls with my sisters and my cousins and my mom and some other people. And it's been really great. I have some cousins who are yoga teachers, so they teach Zoom yoga classes. My sister is an art teacher, so she taught us like a painting class. My other sister taught us like a cooking class. We cooked risotto. And honestly, since the pandemic started, we've been doing kind of these weekly Zoom cousin calls, and it's just been a great way to connect with my family. And honestly, had this pandemic not been going on, I probably would not be connecting with my family so much. So it's been kind of an amazing opportunity to stay connected with my family, to see people that I love, that love me, that are extremely supportive on a regular basis, where, ordinarily I don't think I would see them all the time like that. So that has been great. I think it's extremely important to have a very strong support system, to be around people who love you, who are encouraging you, who believe in you, because it's a taxing process, but ultimately I think it's extremely worth it. We have to create this change. We have to be there as a generation. I think we have to step up. We have to become leaders, because this world is only going to change if we step up and take the reins. We have to kind of create the world that we want to see and that we want to live in. So that's what I'm doing here. That's what the people of Northwest Ohio, it's a great to kind of be a part of this movement to see it sort of really bubble up and create some change. So we're looking forward to it.
That's awesome. I agree with you as well because, my staff and I, we're all college students. And so, me and a bunch of my friends had planned to actually be in DC for the summer. And this is the longest that I've been home and with my family in quite a very long time. And, originally coming home and was like, oh, I'm not going to see my friends. But I can say, at least from my experience, that I've very much enjoyed being home with family, especially during this stressful time. And, instead of, there is so much value in in-person connection and being there with the people that care about you. So unless you have any other closing remarks, that's all we have on our end.
No, I really appreciate you inviting me to do this, to get our message out to individuals. And again, I appreciate the work that Friends of Intelligent Democracy is doing. I think you're so right. It's important to have a seat at the table as young people, to be involved in this process and to kind of realize that, unfortunately for what it is, the system right now, money talks a little bit. So, to have these kind of grassroots organizations and gather these grassroots dollars and pull them together so that, you can be impactful in the races that you want to see, create some changes. That's an amazing mission, and it's an amazing movement. So I really appreciate what y'all are doing. I appreciate everyone who tuned in today, who believes in change. Keep it up. Keep up the hard work. I know some days are tough, and some days it seems like, nothing is changing and nothing is possible. But, believe me, you can create some positive change in your community, in your country, in this world by just doing some small steps. So thank you all so much for allowing us to share our message today.
Great. And like I said, thank you for being here. And again, I also want to say thank you to everyone who's watching today or watching the archive stream, and put one last plug that to support candidates like Nick, you can donate at the link that's on screen, secure.appblue.com/donate/Intellidem. And I hope everyone stays healthy and stays safe. Have a nice night.